Hi everybody, I'm Charlie Bell and I work for the National Trust, and I'm going to talk to you today about the Restoring Shropshire's Verges project. So just a little bit of background first. As I said, I work for the National Trust and the project that I work on is called Stepping Stones. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Stepping Stones project and how that links with the work of the Verges project and what I do in my role to support the Verges work. So thinking about the Stepping Stones project, I'm going to start with the project vision. So the first thing to say is that it's a 50-year vision, and it's for the natural habitats in the Shropshire Hills to be restored, healthy and connected. And also thinking about the people who live there. So it's for the people who live, work and visit here to understand, appreciate and support the efforts to rejuvenate this remarkable landscape. So a bit of a mouthful, but I'm going to break down what that means in a bit more detail. So the first thing to say is that it's a partnership project. It's currently being led by the National Trust, but you can see the various other partners there on the left of the screen. And the map here shows the extent of the project area, which is 200 square kilometres in South Shropshire. So you can see it basically stretches from the Stretton Hills in the east over to the Stiper Stones and beyond in the west. So within this project area, there are two core sites for nature. So the first is the Long Mind, that's highlighted here. And as many of you will know, that's managed by the National Trust along with the commoners, and it's a triple SI. And then we've got the Stiper Stones at the other side of the project area, which is a National Nature Reserve, and that's managed by Natural England. And the project is really about thinking about these two core areas, but more importantly, the landscape in and around them as well, and how they might link together. So what's the problem then? Why is the project needed? Well, really, in South Shropshire, as with many other places in the UK, we're really suffering from a loss of habitat, but importantly, a loss of habitat connectivity. So this quote on the left sums it up quite nicely. This is taken from the Shropshire Flora, published in 2015. And it says there appears to be an increasing polarisation between the conservation-rich and the conservation-poor areas, and an overall weakening of the ecological network. So really what that quote is saying is that the nature reserves and the land that's managed exclusively for nature aren't enough. They're becoming cut off and isolated from each other, and we're losing those links in between. So in this picture that you can see, the area further back, that's quite connected. We've got some patches of woodland, we've got some meadows, we've got hedgerows and some infield trees. But then in the foreground here, we've got the reverse of that really. We've got a landscape that's a little bit denuded of those features and isn't really connected in the same way as the landscape in the back of the shot there. So what's Stepping Stones going to do about it? Well, our aim is to connect the wildlife habitats in the area by strengthening and creating stepping stones or patches of habitat and corridors between the Long Mind and the Stretton Hills in the east and the Stiper Stones in the west. So when we talk about habitat corridors or wildlife corridors, we're really thinking about long linear features. So things like hedgerows, streamside wetlands, and of course road verges. So the solution to this this problem within the landscape is really illustrated by this graphic here. So you can see we've got the core areas here, we've got the Long Mind and Stiper Stones, the big green areas, and in between the little circles are representing those patches of habitat or stepping stones, and then we've got some landscape corridors here representing things like hedgerows and road verges. So some areas will be kind of buffered around those as well to try and increase the impact of those core areas for nature. So what has this all got to do with road verges? So one of the key habitats that we're focusing on for stepping stones are meadows, so wildflower-rich grasslands. So you can see some examples here, and the connecting feature for meadows could well be road verges if they are managed correctly. So there's a way of thinking of road verges as really just long linear meadows. And that's the vision we have for the landscape, really, these patches of high quality wildflower-rich grassland linked by these long linear verges along the area's roads. So I thought it's worth just taking a bit of a step back here and talking about meadows and why they're important and why they're one of the targets of the Stepping Stones project. So what is a meadow? Well, when answering this, it's sometimes helpful to think what isn't a meadow. So a good quality hay meadow in summer looks a little bit like this, and it's defined as an area of permanent grassland containing wildflowers. And the overall appearance can actually be quite pale, sort of browny green and unshowy. And it's only really on closer inspection that the diversity of colours and flowers and the real beauty of the habitat becomes clear. When people hear the phrase wildflower meadow, they often envisage something like this. But this is actually a bed of annual wildflowers with no grass or very little grass, and it's definitely not a meadow. And the reason it's important to make that distinction is that a bed of annuals like this, cornflowers, poppies, things like that, they grow on fertile soil, and they're often found as part of a garden or maybe an urban planting project, such as on a roundabout or in urban areas, urban road verges. Whereas a wildflower meadow, so the picture on the left, that's a semi-natural grassland. It contains native wildflower species, and it's traditionally cut for hay each summer. But the word grassland is important. So a true meadow is home to many different species of fine grass, sweet vernal grass or crested dog's tail. And that's why it's much softer in colour, so it looks much browner and a lot less showy and colourful. And true wildflower meadows grow better on unproductive soil, where the vigorous grasses don't outcompete the wildflowers. So many of the species in an area of permanent grassland are perennials rather than annuals in the picture on the right. So this is also not a meadow. Some of you might remember this image. It was the default background picture on Windows computers a few years ago. And many people say it's the most viewed image in the world because of that. And the image was actually titled Bliss, although it does depict quite a species poor, wildlife unfriendly bit of sown grass. It's by no means a meadow, and for those of us in the know, it's by no means bliss either. There's a common misconception that green fields are natural. In fact, green fields like the one on the left are often a result of a sown grass monoculture, plus the application of fertiliser and pesticides and herbicides. So as we've seen, true wildflower meadows like this one on the right are much softer in appearance, much browner. And this is the National Trust Meadows at Ginley at Alstretton. So why are meadows important, and why should we care about them? Well, for one thing, they're incredibly beautiful. You have to work a little bit for that reward. As I've mentioned, they're a lot less showy, less in your face, but wander through a meadow, or even better, lie down in one, and you'll be captivated by the variety of species and colours and textures on display. They're also incredibly important for wildlife. Meadows and species-rich grassland can support a huge range of plants and animals, including wildflowers, fungi, bees, flies, beetles, spiders, moths, butterflies, reptiles, amphibians, and small mammals. And they obviously help support predators like bats and birds as well. In the UK, more priority species for conservation attention are associated with grasslands than with any other habitat. Species-rich grassland also provide other environmental benefits as well. That can include carbon storage. So there's a huge amount of carbon stored in a healthy grassland. Water retention to prevent flooding, habitat for pollinators, and meadows which have escaped intensive farming methods such as ploughing and harrowing can also be really archaeologically important as well, because what lies beneath has been undisturbed for centuries. Okay, so just thinking about the state of meadows in the UK. Sadly, the state of meadows in the UK is absolutely dire. The UK's remaining species-rich grassland now cover just a minute fraction of the area that they once covered, even relatively recently in the early 20th century. So there were once wildflower meadows in every parish, or almost every parish in the country, but today only 2% of the meadows that existed in the 1930s currently remain. Nearly 7.5 million acres of wildflower meadow have been lost so far, and they're still being destroyed. Of those that do survive, around 75% only exist as really small scattered fragments, which leaves them very vulnerable to destruction and a sort of decrease in genetic diversity. Again, thinking about them becoming isolated and cut off from each other in the landscape, disconnected ecologically. So the state of meadows in Shropshire is no exception really, and it mirrors the decline across the rest of the UK. And there are still remnants and pockets of traditional meadows, especially in the South Shropshire Hills, where various nature reserves and rural churchyards act as relics of what was once a much more widespread habitat. But don't despair, there's various projects, groups and individuals are working in Shropshire and beyond to restore Shropshire's meadows and create new ones. So special mention to the Marches Meadow Group, who are a fantastic group focused on meadow creation. And they have a website which if you search online for Marches Meadow Group will come up, and Shropshire Wildlife Trust as well, who manage various meadow reserves. Of course, Restoring Shropshire's Verges project is also focused on meadow creation, although long linear meadows rather than more traditional squarer meadows. So I'll be talking about the work of that group for the rest of the talk. So just coming back to those meadows and the potential of road verges to connect them up. So what's the problem? Why aren't Shropshire's road verges currently acting as these long linear meadows? Well, we've got some examples here, 3 examples of less than ideal road verges resulting from less than ideal road verge management. So starting with the picture on the left, you'll see this has been cut too early. So all the flowers have been removed, so all the nectar and pollen sources have been just cut, so they've gone. And the vegetation has just been left as a thick mat that's smothering everything below it, really. The picture in the middle is what happens after the situation on the left has been like that for a few weeks. You get this dry mat of vegetation, which really chokes out all but the most vigorous growth. And as that rots down, that just increases the fertility of the road verge. And as we've already mentioned, traditional wildflower meadows thrive on unproductive soil, so unfertile soil. And if that happens year after year, you just get a mass of hogweed, sometimes bramble and nettle as well, which can have value for wildlife, but it doesn't have that variety. You know, it's basically a hogweed and nettle monoculture along the road. And really the verges could be playing a much bigger role for wildlife. And when you get hogweed growing like this, you just squeeze out any other wildflowers. They just can't compete with more vigorous plants like hogweed. So how could road verges be managed differently then? Well, this is actually the annual haymaking cycle. So the annual way that you would manage a hay meadow. So just to quickly run through this, we'll start in March, May time, which is where we are now. So traditionally at this time of year, hay meadows will be shut up and livestock would be removed. This would actually be quite late to still be grazing a meadow, and probably the livestock would have gone in March and April. So from now until August, a traditional hay meadow is left, and that allows the wildflowers and grasses to bloom, and of course all various insects to complete their life cycle, ground nesting birds like curlew to nest there. So it's a really important feature of a traditional haymaking cycle, that the fact that the fields are just left to their own devices between April and August, and that there isn't any management. So moving to sort of mid-July or August into September, that's when a traditional hay meadow is cut, and those cuttings are then baled up and removed from the site. Then they're not left there, they're made use of in various ways. And then into October, we often get some follow-up grazing, so it's called aftermath grazing as well, and sometimes some harrowing to remove any remaining thatch in the meadow. Then from the autumn through to the winter and early spring, if it's wet, then the meadows aren't grazed, or if it's dry, then they'll be grazed extensively, so just a small number of animals in there. And then coming into the spring, there might be some light grazing, there might be no grazing at all, It sort of depends on the situation. So that's the annual haymaking cycle in a nutshell. There's obviously variations on that, but that's basically what it is. So thinking about how this could be adapted to road verges. Obviously, livestock grazing is not really going to be possible along road verges. So instead of shutting up the field and removing livestock, we'd just have a situation where the verge is left. And through to April and August again, no change there from a hay meadow. We would recommend that the verges are just left, allowing wildflowers and grasses to bloom. Into mid-July and September, a late summer cut and collect. So that collect is a really important part of this process. As we've seen, it's no good if the cuttings are just left there to rot down and smother everything underneath. It needs to be collected and removed from the site. Then into August and October, various options really, depending on how the verge is going to be restored. So one option to try and speed up the process of restoring it back to hay meadow would be to harrow and then spread things like yellow rattle, which is a parasitic plant, often called the meadow maker, because it parasitizes coarse grass species and really allows the finer grasses and the wildflowers chance to get established. So yellow rattle could be spread. We might also put some green hay on there. So green hay is basically hay that's been cut from a species-rich wildflower meadow. And if you transport it and spread it on a new site within a day or two, then it can help transfer some seeds to reseed that new site. Or potentially we can buy in wildflower seed, obviously making sure it's the right mix and represents the local species mix. So then October to February, depending on the situation, there could be another possible cut and collect. And then moving into the spring, again, depending, there might be another spring cut and collect. But really, it's this side of the diagram that's important, just leaving it be through April to August, and then following it up with a cut and collect at the end of the summer. So a lot of work on road verges actually involves managing perceptions. So a lot of people have an idea of what a verge should look like, and that is often a very neatly mown area of very green grass. When we're starting that transition to grassland and species-rich meadow habitat, there's often a perception that the area's been neglected, or it's just been left and nothing's happening. So there is a device called framing, which is illustrated very nicely by this picture on the left, whereby a metre or so is actually cut, and then the meadow habitat is sort of left beyond that. So people realise that that's a deliberate decision. It's not just that the verge has been left there and neglected. Signage and communication is also really important. So various verge projects around the country have got these signs, different designs, but all with roughly the same message, and the fact that this is an area that's being managed for nature and that it's not to be mown. So just coming on from that more general introduction into what's actually happening in Shropshire. So Shropshire has its own verge project. It's called the Restoring Shropshire's Verges Project, or RSVP. And this is our logo, and you'll see that cropping up more and more, hopefully, around the county. So RSVP as a concept has really been going for several years now, and I just want to talk about some key individuals who've really helped to kickstart the project and sort of give them the credit that they deserve. So the first one of these is Janet Cobb. She's been really instrumental in driving forward the verges work in Shropshire. She's incredibly passionate about the potential of road verges to sort of really work for local wildlife. And Janet's been doing lots and lots of talks to various groups around the county, and she's also been brilliant at lobbying Shropshire Council and really helping get them on board with the whole concept of changing verge management for the better. This is Rob Rowe, who will probably be familiar to some of you because he's involved in so many things relating to wildlife conservation in Shropshire. But Rob's an excellent botanist, and he's done so many surveys of road verges in Shropshire and really helped build the picture of which verges are species rich and really great examples of potential meadow habitat, and which verges are less species rich and could be targets for restoration. He's also done a huge amount of work sort of helping manage demonstration verges as well, which I'll come on to in a few minutes. And thirdly, my colleague Peter Carty at the National Trust, he actually did a talk for the Wildlife Trust on the Stepping Stones project a few months ago. So if you want to find out more about stepping stones, then have a look back and watch that. But sort of outside of the National Trust, Peter's also been really involved with the Verges project, and especially driving forward the practical work that's been happening on some of Shropshire's verges. And again, I'll come on to that shortly. So I just wanted to acknowledge those three really. And there've been many other people involved as well, but a special recognition to these three. So over the last 4 or 5 years, as I've mentioned, a huge amount of work has been done. I mentioned the botanical surveys that Rob Rowe has done, and this has produced maps like this one. So you can see all the verges here that have got a coloured line on have been surveyed by Rob and others. And the darker the colour, so the darker red the colour, the more species rich. So as I've mentioned, this has been really useful in helping identify these really good examples of road verges within the county. I've mentioned as well various talks and lobbying that has been going on, especially led by Janet, and the fact that we've now got a series of demonstration verges that are managed as hay meadows throughout the county. So early last year, in February 2020, the Stepping Stones project received some money from Players of People's Postcode Lottery, and that really kick-started a project with Stepping Stones working with local community groups, and I was employed as the project officer on that project. And RSVP were one of the community groups who was lined up to work quite closely with the Stepping Stones project. So I'm just going to cover what we were able to do together and how Stepping Stones has helped drive forward the Verges work in Shropshire. So I've mentioned the support we received from Players of People's Postcode Lottery, and quite a sizable chunk of that support went towards purchasing this sort of two-wheel tractor and mower and various other attachments that go with it as well. And what this has allowed us to do is to really upscale the management of those demonstration verges in Shropshire. It's relatively flexible in terms of how it can be used. It's not huge, so it can get into relatively small spaces and small verges. And it's really just helped massively with that management, especially the cutting and collecting work that's gone on in late summer. So that was a way that we could really help out. Another way we've helped out is to try and bring the various people who were working on road verges together and form an RSVP committee. And that's important for a number of reasons, partly just to help with the sort of joined up thinking that's going on, but also to bring the group together and form a constitution, which will in the future allow the group to have a bank account and obtain insurance and run work parties and all that side of things. So it was really great that a number of organisations are represented on the RSVP committee. So we've got National Trust and Stepping Stones Project via me and Peter Carty. We've also got Caring for God's Acre represented. So they're a conservation charity that focus on the potential of burial grounds to help with conservation. Shropshire Council are obviously a really key partner as they have the overall management of the verges within Shropshire, and it's great that they're represented on the committee as well, and Shropshire Wildlife Trust as well through Joe Phillips. So I just mentioned Shropshire Council on the last slide, and they're absolutely a key partner in this work. And RSVP is really in ongoing talks and liaison with Shropshire Council over the management of verges. And I have to say they are very supportive. So you know, the council are extremely supportive of the Verges project and the work that we're trying to do. So that is great to have them on board. And the discussions that we're having involve options for future verge management in Shropshire, as well as an agreement to leave our demonstration sites uncut, which is fantastic. And there are real economic benefits to councils for changing the way that verges are managed. There's a national campaign about road verges, which is being led by Plant Life. And as part of that, various studies have gone on in different parts of the country, which outline the economic benefits of changing the way road verges are managed to more of a hay meadow type system. and yeah, the economic benefits can be huge. So that's obviously a driver for Shropshire Council, as is their declaration of a climate emergency and their ambition to reduce carbon emissions as well. It is a complex situation though. Some verges will always need cutting due to safety and visibility concerns, so that's obviously an absolute priority. And also a lot of the verge management is no longer done in-house by Shropshire Council. It's contracted out and in some cases subcontracted out again. So although Shropshire Council, as I've said, are very supportive, it's not quite as simple as just immediately being able to change the way that the verges are managed. Some verges are also managed by others, whether officially or unofficially. So that could be parish councils, private individuals. You'll often find people will take on the responsibility for verges outside their houses, and businesses as well. So if there's a large expanse of road verge in the entrance to a business, then they might well take on the management of that. So yeah, as I've said, the situation is complex, and changing the management of road verges throughout Shropshire is not quite as simple as it might sound. So just to talk about some of those demonstration verges that I've alluded to so far. These have been picked to really represent a mixture of sites. So some are those really great examples of species-rich verges, and some are more works in progress to demonstrate their potential and in some ways how easy it is to restore patches of verge to wildflower meadow. So you can see a verge on the left there, that's at Edgeton in South Shropshire, and that's Peter Carty doing a bit of verge management last summer. The verge on the right of the screen is actually almost a small meadow, really. It's an absolutely massive verge at Nind. And I put this in just to show that, you know, we're not always talking about a metre wide strip next to a road. It can sometimes be a really quite substantial piece of grassland. And this is really a sort of amalgamation of all the different demonstration verges, or a lot of the different demonstration verges that we've been working on for the last year or so. So you can see from looking at that there's a range of different shapes and sizes of verges, different locations, and different techniques being employed there. So, for instance, the verge at Booker Bend, it's called, in the top right there, that's being harrowed and prepared for some application of green hay. Whereas in other cases, it's just a change to the cut and collect regime and see what comes up, see what species might be there in the seed bank. And just an example of what can happen, even after only a couple of years of management. So the verge here is Edgeton. So we've got a very narrow verge actually, but really a lovely strip of wildflowers with some really nice species coming up, including some orchids there as well. Another way in which Stepping Stones has been able to help is a little bit of budget to get some signs made. So I talked earlier about the importance of signage to tell people what's happening on the verge and the fact it's not just being neglected. So the yellow signs there are what we produced last year. And the sign on the right is the sort of updated version for this year. So 50 of these signs have gone out around South Shropshire, and actually a little bit outside of South Shropshire as well, because RSVP is a Shropshire-wide organisation, although the Stepping Stones is sort of driving the work in the south of the county, so that's where we tend to focus. So if you're out and about, especially in South Shropshire, do keep an eye out for these signs, and they mark the locations of those demonstration verges. So in theory, those verges which will be left uncut by the council. So here are a few pictures of those signs out there. The one on the left is at Bishop's Castle, at the crossroads there, just before you get to the town. And the one on the right is at Condover. And we've even got some in Shrewsbury as well. So this is in Halscott, and there's some lovely cowslips there in the background. I should mention actually that woodland road verges are also really important and can support a range of lovely woodland flower species, so things like primrose, bluebell, wood anemone. So I haven't really focused on those in this talk because a lot of the work that we do, especially the work with Shropshire Council, is designed to change the management to hay meadow management. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that woodland verges are important as well, and shouldn't be forgotten. So despite the challenges of COVID in the last year or so, we have been able to get out and do some work parties. So this is a work party in Bishop's Castle. And as part of this, some hacking of bramble and hogweed was done by some scythers, and you can see some people raking the sort of aftermath of that scything. So this will really just help prepare the area to return to grassland, and as I've mentioned, help reduce the fertility and really get rid of those species like bramble and hogweed that are just dominating everywhere and sort of not allowing any of the finer grasses and wildflowers to get established. As part of the same work party, we were planting some plug plants as well. So that's another technique that can be used to help increase the diversity of these demonstration road verges. So I think we were planting dog daisy and nutweed there that had actually been dug up by a local construction project, so they would otherwise just have gone completely to waste. So they were rescued and planted out in some of the verges around Bishop's Castle. So one thing that we've tried to do as well this year is really increase the amount of communication that we're doing and increase the number of people who are aware of the project. So if you are on Facebook and Twitter, do look us up. We're at Shrop's Verges on both Facebook and Twitter. We've also got a good relationship developing with BBC Radio Shropshire, and we've done a few interviews on there. The latest one being last week. My colleague Peter Carty was talking about road verges on there. As well as a series of talks to various local groups, and as I've mentioned, it's really Janet who's leading that side of things. Last year, Caring for God's Acre, who I think I've already mentioned, they produced a short film called Restoring Shropshire's Verges Project, and you can find that on YouTube if you just Google the name of the film and Caring for God's Acre. We're also building our links with Plant Life. So I mentioned that they have a national verges campaign, and they produce some really great resources. So one of them is shown here on the right, Managing Grassland Road Verges. They've also got something called the Good Verge Guide, and again, you can find those online if you Google Plant Life Verges Project. There's a project in Ireland which is absolutely brilliant as well, called Don't Mow, Let It Grow, and they've made all their resources available for any other verge group to use, which has been fantastic. You know, they've got logos, artwork, pictures, posters, and a huge amount of information. So again, if you search online for Don't Mow, Let It Grow, then you'll find that project in Ireland. We've also got ongoing links with South Shropshire Climate Partnership as well as the Shropshire-wide climate partnership work. And I think they're really acknowledging the role that verges could play in helping trap carbon within that habitat. So in terms of future plans, well, ongoing liaison with Shropshire Council is going to be very important. We've got meetings lined up with them to discuss how verge management might change in the future. Something else which is really exciting is a possible pilot project that we might be involved with if we get some funding. So Stepping Stones is currently waiting to hear the result of a funding bid to the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, which is DEFRA money being administered by the Heritage Lottery. So if we're successful with that, then we've got some funding in there to pilot some work looking at the role of anaerobic digesters and whether they could make use of the verge cuttings once they're removed from the road verges in late summer. It's quite exciting because if that turns out to be economically viable, it might mean that the cost of managing verges becomes either neutral or possibly even a source of revenue. So that's something that we're really excited, and fingers crossed we get the funding for that. I'm currently working on a joint press release between National Trust, RSVP and Shropshire Council. So that will detail some of the work that's gone on so far, but also the plans for this year and how the verge management might be changing. So keep a lookout for that. We're hoping to get a bit of coverage in local press and local radio. So do keep your eye open in the next few weeks. Something to mention as well is the Meadow Festival, which is, well, it has been an annual event for the past few years, obviously not last year, but this year, fingers crossed, it's going to be on the 24th of July at the Discovery Centre in Craven Arms. And it's really a celebration of all things related to a meadow. And RSVP will have quite a strong presence there, and you'll be able to chat to us and ask us all about the work that's going on the Verges. And of course, we're going to be continuing and expanding our demonstration verges and work parties. So if you're interested in getting involved in any of that, or if you want to adopt a local road verge and take it on as a demonstration road verge, then that would be absolutely fantastic. Just get in touch. I think my email is at the end of this presentation. So drop me a line and we can add you to the Verges project mailing list and have a chat to you about how you can help with our work. Another exciting thing that we're working on at the moment is the production of a leaflet about Shropshire's road verges. This will run through some of the key species that you can see there, as well as the management for different types of road verge. So a woodland road verge, a grassland road verge. And that should be a really nice, engaging thing. And we'll be giving out copies, hopefully, at the Meadow Festival. So another reason to come and have a chat to us there. So I just want to acknowledge a few organisations. I've mentioned various people already, and just want to also acknowledge that there's a huge number of people involved in the Verges project and a huge amount of work that's gone in so far. But in particular, People's Postcode Lottery, who, as I've already mentioned, have supported a lot of the work of the Verges project through Stepping Stones over the past year. All my colleagues on the committee of the RSVP, so yeah, they're absolutely brilliant. Most people do it in their own time as volunteers, and the work and the effort that goes into that is brilliant. We're still a very young organisation. So again, if anyone's interested in getting involved and taking on some of the roles on the committee, then we're always pleased to hear from you. Just get in touch. Plant Life as well for their support and all the information that they produce on road verges, and Don't Mow, Let It Grow, that project in Ireland that I've already mentioned. So thanks for having me to do this talk. It's been a really great opportunity to help spread the word about the work that's going on Shropshire's Verges. And if you want to get in touch to ask me any questions about anything that I've mentioned, or if you want to get in touch and get involved with the Verges work, then just drop me an email and I'll be really happy to hear from you. Thank you.